Here we want to find all the solutions on the interval from 0 to 2 pi, so all the way around the unit circle, for square root 3 sine t plus cosine t equals 1. Answer coming right up. I want to write this in terms of one function equals 1 minus the other, and this time I'm going to go with square root 3 sine t equals 1 minus cosine t. Now that's not going to help me much, so what I'm going to do is square both sides. Remember that whenever you find a solution by squaring both sides, you may be introducing an extraneous solution or they're all candidate solutions from this point on. So what I have is 3 sine squared t equals 1 minus, and when I FOIL this out, 1 minus cosine t multiplied by 1 minus cosine t, I get 1 minus 2 cosine t plus cosine squared t. I need this entire equation in a single trig function. I want it all cosine or all sine, so I'm going to use the fact that sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. I'm going to make a substitution here. Of course, these are just my notes. So what I have here is 3 times 1 minus cosine squared t. That equals 1 minus 2 cosine t plus cosine t squared. And now I'm going to simplify that equation. And when I simplify that, 3 minus 3 cosine squared t, 1 minus 2 cosine t plus cosine squared t. Now I've got an equation completely in terms of cosine, and I'm going to add 3 cosine squared to both sides, so I have 4 cosine squared t minus 2 cosine t minus 2, and I subtract 3 from both sides, equals 0. I can simplify that a little bit further. I can say that's equivalent to cosine squared t, 2 times cosine squared t minus cosine t minus 1 equals 0. So now I have the equivalent of a quadratic in cosine t, and I can factor that. This is 2 cosine t plus 1, all multiplied by cosine t minus 1 equals 0. Now I use the zero products property, meaning either this expression 2 cosine t plus 1 equals 0, or else cosine t minus 1 equals 0. That's the zero products property. So it must be true then that 2 cosine t plus 1 equals 0, or cosine t minus 1 equals 0. So I need to solve then the two separate equations. Cosine equals minus 1/2. The first one of these possibilities that we want to think about is cosine t equals a negative 1/2. Let me just get a red pen here. Okay, so I know that this is true. Cosine is negative in Q2 and Q3. And if you need help remembering that, remember we have a mnemonic, A smart trig class. All of the trig functions are positive here. Sine and its reciprocal in Q2, only tangent and its reciprocal in Q3 are positive, and cosine and its reciprocal are positive in Q4. Everything else is negative. So therefore, and I've got my memorized 60-30 triangle here, I know my reference angle must be pi over 3, and I've got to find the angles then where cosine t is negative, and they're going to be in Q2 and in Q3. In Q3, t is going to be pi minus 1/3, so that's 2 pi over 3. Now let's put a little note here, that's Q2. And t in Q3 will be pi plus 1/3, so 4 pi over 3, and that's the angle in Q3. And that's for the cosine equals -1/2. Now I need to think through, when is cosine t equal to 1? 1. And you remember we memorized x equals r cosine theta. On the unit circle, of course, r is just 1. So this point right here is the point 1, 0, and that's when t is 0 radians. So between our two equations, we have 3 possible candidates that could solve this equation. We have t equals 2 pi over 3. We have t equals 4 pi over 3. And we have t equals 0. Now we've got to check these in our original equation, because we squared both sides of the equation in the beginning. We've got to check and see if we have any extraneous solutions. This solution, firstly on my calculator I want to make sure I'm in radian mode, and I am. Second quit gets me back to the home screen. Now I'm going to put my equation here in y1, so that's the square root of 3 times sine, I don't have a t here easily accessible, sine t plus cosine x, I'm going to have to use that. So there's my equation, and I expect all my results now to give me 1. Second quit gets me back to the home screen. This time I have another video that shows a similar problem. I show you one way to check. I'm going to show you a different way this time. If we go to second table set, I want you to come down here, and instead of independent variable, which is your t or your x variable, instead of it auto, I want you to change to ask. Then we're going to go to second table, and we're going to put in each one of these as we go. X, when t equals 0 or when x equals 0, the solution is 1. That's good. Next I'm going to say, I'm going to put it in parentheses, 2 pi divided by 3. And that gives me 1. Next, I'm going to have 4 pi divided by 3. And that does not give me 1. So the solutions are 0 and 2 pi over 3. Let's go back and change our table to make sure it's what we're used to. Let's go back to auto. Second quit gets me back to the home screen. We know then that we have just 2 solutions. T equals 0 and t equals 2 pi over 3. 4 pi over 3 was an extraneous solution. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and give this video a like if you found it useful in any way. I'd love to hear your comments or any suggestions for future videos in the comments below. Have a great day.